Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today we have more election news, and we have three guests this time. We've been having different candidates that are on the April 4th ballot, but included on the April 4th ballot will be a referendum for St. Croix County residents to vote on regarding public safety. And my guests are Carl Anderson from the District Attorney's Office, Ken Witt, the County Administrator, and Scott Knutson, our County Sheriff, all of whom have been on the show before. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's start with Ken, I guess. Can you tell our viewers about the referendum? I know it's public safety, and I know it's about $3.5 million, but we're talking a lot of positions that might be included in this. So why don't you break that down for us?
Yeah, you know, St. Croix County, we're one of the fastest growing counties in the state. Really, if you measure us over the last 5 years, we're the fastest growing county out of the 72 counties. So we've really identified a need for public safety. Since levy limits went in 2005, we haven't been able to keep up to the level we need to. So we're at the point now where we would really like to enhance the public safety throughout all aspects of the public safety, a lot of it within the Sheriff's Department. So we're looking at 24 additional positions to be added to the county at the $3.5 million. And so that's what the question is going to ask the voters, is if they would support a levy increase to accommodate this public safety increase.
Okay, and before we get into the specific challenges that I know our prosecutor and our chief law enforcement officer in the county can address, just a little bit on those levy limits. So the county is basically already at its max and couldn't incorporate one or two of the positions into its current budget?
Yeah, I mean, we are at our levy limit. The county has net new construction every year. And so, yes, every year we could add one or two positions or a couple of positions. But this referendum is asking for the addition of 24 positions. This is really an enhancement to the public safety capacity of the county. And when you hear from the sheriff and from the district attorney, you'll have a better understanding of why that need has grown so much over the past decade or so.
Okay. And in all deference, Carl, I'm going to start with Sheriff Knutson because that's kind of the intake area for everything. So what kind of challenges is our Sheriff's Department facing with its current personnel levels?
You know, currently we run with about 30 deputies. You know, we work our 12-hour shifts, so we have anywhere from, at minimum, 4 on per shift, up to, if we're full without vacations and FMLA, things like that, we could get 6 or 7 out per shift. But that's covering the 722 square miles for the county. Back when I started in 1996, into my 28th year now, the county population was a little less than 55,000. Now we're over 95,000.
And how many did we have when it was 55,000?
We had about 6 less at that time, 7 less at that time.
All right, so maybe around 24.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so through the years we had a couple cops, officers, cops grant back during the Clinton cop era, and we had received a couple deputies then. But since 2007, we've only had one addition to our patrol staff. So we've remained fairly stagnant in our numbers, even though our calls for service continue to go up. You know, with that 40,000 increase in population, increase in traffic, we're at over 25,000 calls for service now each year. Over the last, since that 2007, you know, that's increased about 18% in calls for service. Our crashes have increased. We're now at about 2,500 crashes per year. Last year we had, of those 2,500 crashes, there's about 500 injuries. Things are taking more time. Calls are taking more time. They're getting more complex. And our staffing levels really not keeping up with the complexity of it. So what we've had to do is we've had to prioritize. It's not to a point where we don't take those calls, but it's to the point where it takes us longer to get to them. And much of what we're doing right now is reactive and not proactive. When we talk about proactivity, There are a number of things that can help in our jobs each day and for the community, for the benefit of the community, and that's trying to catch offenders, whether it be criminal offenders or traffic, before it gets to a point where it's impactful to the residents, kind of quality of life things.
But in addition to traffic and criminal, you also respond to complaints that don't necessarily nicely fit into either of those categories. They might be mental health issues, correct? And we've seen a huge boom in those.
We have seen a huge boom in those. One of the things that we have looked up is how much time it takes for a call for service. As an example, a drunk driving takes about 2 hours. But it's the mental health that is really chewing up our time. On average, from the time we walk in the door of somebody in crisis, if we have to get them to an emergency detention bed, which could be in Amory, Eau Claire, or Winnebago, the median time is 13 hours.
Okay, wow.
So oftentimes, the deputy that takes the call is not the deputy that finishes the call. It's over 2 shifts, and if we go across state, that's 2 deputies.
Right.
That is one of the most draining on our resources.
And you can speak firsthand that there has been an increase in the mental health calls of either people presenting potential harm to others or themselves.
Yes, that has increased, and oftentimes because of how the system is set up, the jail becomes a spot that ends up not on the initial emergency detention housing of them, but in the long run, as we work through a criminal process, there are a number in there that should be at hospitals as opposed to being in jail. So mental health is a very key factor right now that we're dealing with.
And before I shift to Carl and talk about his office and the DA's office and how this impacts them, can you give us that breakdown of those positions? Because I kind of want to give folks some sense
Sure.
for where those positions would be.
Yep. So there are 8 sheriff deputies, so those would be deputies that are on the road. There's 4 correction deputies for in the jail, so that'd be 1 per shift on our scheduling. There's 3 investigators. 2 of them would be in the sheriff's department, 1 of them would be in the district attorney's office. There are 2 pretrial case managers with our Justice Support Services Division. There's 2 support staff, 2 deputy clerk of courts on the court side of it, 1 CHIPS attorney, which would help again with the district attorney's office relieving some of their pressure, and then 2 co-responders. To go back to your mental health question, the co-responders report on scene to those types of calls and are able to then potentially help relieve the sheriff's department from some of the length of time spent there.
Right. You're talking about hiring people who have special training in responding to those type of calls and not taking up the time of, say, a sheriff's deputy who's got training in patrol and accidents and felony law enforcement and so forth. All right, so moving then over to our district attorney, Carl Anderson. Carl, I didn't hear on that list a single person listed as assistant district attorney. So how does this help your office if we're not hiring, and why aren't we hiring assistant district attorneys?
So as the sheriff talked about, and Ken Witt talked about, just as the population increases, there's more crime, more felonies, and that trickles down. They're the first responders, but then that trickles down to other departments within the county, one of which is my office, the district attorney's office. And a big thing that takes a lot of time in our office is all now in the modern age digital evidence. So there's body camera footage from multiple officers for each case. There's cell phone extraction, social media searches, and all that takes a lot of time for our staff to get from law enforcement, save it onto our systems, make copies for defense. And that's pretty, the ubiquity of body cameras is relatively new. They started coming out a while ago, but now pretty much everybody has them. And that takes a lot of time. That's something our legal assistants have to do. So one of the positions is for a legal assistant. And then the reason assistant DA is not on there is because prosecutors, including myself, the DA and assistant DAs, are state employees.
Okay.
So the county can't make a new position for an assistant district attorney. That's up to the state. But the CHIPS attorney, child in need of protection or services, that's something that by statute can be the responsibility of either corporation counsel or the DA's office. And the majority of the counties, it's within corporation counsel. So under this, they'd have a new attorney in their office to take on that caseload from us, which is essentially like giving us another prosecutor because it frees up that caseload that we're now currently handling.
And I'm just going to take a wild guess, but I'm assuming that the number of CHIPS cases has gone up since the population was 55,000 compared to 95,000.
Right, and it goes up even faster than the population because child in need of protection or service cases can go on for 18 years. They can go on until the child's 18 or even 19 if they're still in school. So they keep coming and they don't go away very fast, and they constantly have hearings.
And so, and just for our viewers, there is a difference between CHIPS and juvenile proceedings.
Right, there's two types of juvenile cases we deal with. There's what we call delinquencies, which is equivalent of a juvenile, someone over 10 years old, committing what would be a crime if done by adult, separate closed proceedings. We'll continue to handle those, but the cases of basically neglect or abuse, those would be transferred to corporation counsel.
Okay. And so what other, position benefits, to those services would then this provide?
So one of the investigation positions would be assigned to our office. So also by statute, the district attorney can appoint an investigator. They're fully licensed law enforcement. It's subject to approval by the county board and most importantly funding in this case. And so part of the problem the sheriff's department and we have, not problem, but just reality, I guess, is we're a relatively rural county. We have a lot of smaller agencies, many of which are not 24/7, so they don't always have somebody on duty. So if they have no one on duty, sheriff's department responds. And if we need follow-up for investigation, they might not have anyone on duty, or they might have not have somebody familiar with a certain type of search warrant or something like that. So this investigator would be in our office and be able to do that kind of follow-up. And currently we just have to bring in investigators from the sheriff's office who are doing their own thing. They might have just got 2 sex assaults that day, and then I'm asking them to stop what they're doing to help us out.
I recall, 35 years ago, literally, when I was a prosecutor, and that was one of the things when a sheriff's deputy or police officer sent us up a case referral for charges. We had these carbon copy paper back in the day, and we would write on there that follow-up was needed. We can't charge this case because we need follow-up. And they were golden in color and goldenrod. And so that was the dreaded goldenrod sheet of paper that the patrol officers, the last thing they wanted to see, because they wanted to be able to stop people, make arrests, but they didn't want to have to do follow-up. And then our investigators were already backed up in trying to prove crimes that hadn't been forwarded to the DA's office yet. So I really think that is a huge benefit, especially now we're talking about all the technologies since the carbon copy paper has come into place. You've got body cams and dash cams and so forth. And having defended a few criminal cases since that technology, I know it takes a lot of time to go through that video. You see a lot of the town when you're going through or countryside, but you have to watch all of that in order to get to the stuff that would be relevant to the charge. So.
And I mean, just the number of cell phones extractions that law enforcement does now, if you don't do it, the jury wonders why you didn't do it.
Right.
And, we want to know, too, what's on there, if we have probable cause that there's evidence on there. And, you can imagine how much data is on a cell phone and how many hours that takes just to go through one cell phone.
Right. So I didn't hear in there victim witness services. Is there any potential impact to that, or is that just general? If you have relief in these other areas, it's going to free them up as well.
Right. I mean, just the more, if we can have more resources, we delegate as we have people for, and victim witness. I think right now we have 4 judges, 4 people in victim witness. So as long as everybody's there, we have at least 1 per courtroom. That's another one that, eventually we're going to need someone else too. But we tried this list started a lot bigger, and we narrowed it down to what do we need right now. Not what do we need ideally that will still be good 10 years from now, but what's needed right now.
Right. None of these positions will be hired and then they'll be twiddling their thumbs looking for work to do.
Right.
Okay. So, but 8 positions, compared to what you said, you had 30 currently. That's a big increase, but if you think about adding only 1 officer since 2007, that's 16 years. I can't imagine what that does to the caseloads and so forth.
Yeah, it definitely slows down the ability to clear some of those. And again, it's back to that prioritizing. And for patrol deputies, that's only 2 per shift.
Right.
The example and scenario I use is sometimes when people drive by and they see a crash and there's 4 or 5 county squads there, that's it for the county.
Right.
There's nobody else in the county because we're all at this crash. So I think it's important that we help that out.
Right. It's not that the number of county highways miles have increased, that you need, more you have more roads that have to be covered. It's just the number of calls a certain population generates, and then because of our culture and with the mental health and those things, those are the biggest generators of length of calls and take people off the roadways, enforcing the traffic laws and helping other folks. So, all right. Big question then, Ken. How much is this going to cost and how is it going to be paid for?
Yeah. Well, the referendum is asking for an annual increase of $3.5 million. To put that into perspective, though, that $3.5 million is spread across the entire county. So the county has a $120 million budget, so we're adding $3.5 million to that. If you try to
that's roughly 3%.
Yeah, a little bit less than that. If you try to break it down per household then, so it comes out to just under $25 per $100,000 of value on your home. And so if the average home is $266,000, that's about $65 per year.
Or a little more than $5 a month increase.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, what other alternatives were considered to fund this?
Yeah. Well, every year we have requests for additional positions. The district attorney's office has been asking for additional support staff for a number of years. The sheriff's department always has requests for staff. And we've been prioritizing and filling in spots where we can. 911 isn't on this list because we've added some positions in the dispatch center over the last few years. But the number of requests we have is just too great for the annual amount that we're allowed to allocate. So that's really where we're at, is either we continue that process of prioritizing and just adding a little bit, or we take this step with the referendum and finally get caught up.
Okay. And again, you mentioned these levy limits. They were set in place in 2005. School districts have had levy limits for even longer than that. But have those levy limits kept up with inflation over those 18 years? Do you know?
No, they haven't. So last year, our net new construction number was like 2.8%, but inflation was, 8% plus. And so it doesn't keep up with it. If you look at the tax levy rate for St. Croix County, we're near historic lows, going all the way back to the 1970s. If you look at the mill rate, we're right there at the bottom of that level.
And Wisconsin overall, as a state, has declining population, and so a majority of the counties are actually seeing decreases in population, and maybe some sheriff's departments are seeing decreases in case we're not seeing that here. And so these levy limits that haven't kept pace with inflation probably do fine in maybe some of those other counties, but that hasn't been the case here. So why is this need for the referendum? Again, why didn't they look for cutting something somewhere else in the budget? Because there has been, I think, a recognized need that public safety needs to come, first. It needs to be a priority.
Yeah, so public safety is our priority. Always has been and always will be. We always allocate something in that public safety field. When you look at, though, everything that the county does, and the county does a lot of different things, a lot of different areas that we are in, a lot of those are mandated services. And so the state requires us. We're an arm of the state, and they give us this long list of things that we are required to do.
State mandates.
Yeah. So when you say, well, cut something, well, the problem is that we can't. A lot of those services are required to be performed. And a lot of the other services then that maybe aren't required to be performed are heavily grant funded or subsidized in some other way. So you could take a $3 million program that's 90% funded through a grant source and save $300,000. So it would take millions and millions and millions of dollars of cuts to services that everyone is relying on to get to this $3.5 million.
And the only thing worse than a state mandate is an unfunded state mandate,
Yes.
right? And we are hearing rumblings because of what happened in Waukesha and that whole person who was out on bail and drove into the crowd at that parade. Calls for locking up people who are accused of crimes and keeping them locked up while they're being prosecuted. That would be something that could be impacted by this because you have a greater need for jail personnel, which are included in this. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that depends on what the legislature does with, if they modify the statute on what the courts can or should consider for bail. Absolutely, that could result in more people being held. I guess that's a question for the legislature on what happens there.
But the legislature in Madison is not short on passing feel-good measures that make them look like they're tough on crime, but then it ends up on your desk or your desk where you got to try and enforce the law and, in your case, then prosecute. So, all right. If approved, when will this tax levy increase go into effect?
Yeah, so the tax levy would be effective for 2024. If approved by the voters in April, I know there's a lot of push for an early start on some of these positions, and so we would probably look at a phased-in approach using some of the cash reserves that we have over the rest of 2023 to try to start phasing everything in. But the increase would be effective for 2024.
Well, you mentioned you have a $120 million annual budget, so there is a reserve fund for cash flow purposes. You don't have to get into short-term borrowing. So you do have something in that reserve that could start these positions sooner than January 1, 2024.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So that's a short-term solution. But what we're really looking for is that long-term solution to our public safety needs.
Okay. But people won't actually be literally paying that bill until they see their tax bills in mid-December of 2023, if this were to pass.
Correct.
Okay. And you've mentioned about how soon these positions could be available. Is there a place where viewers could learn more about this referendum?
Yeah, we've put together a website on the county's page, so www.secwi.gov/referendum. We have all the information out there, lots of statistics and charts to show the need for services that we have. We also are going to have a couple of open houses at the government center. So if you want to come in and talk to the district attorney or the sheriff or myself about any questions that the people have, they're welcome to come.
Now, one of the things, and I bring it up because you hear on the street, is that folks, saw their tax bills and the increase from the county previously, but I think it was probably the last time you were on. We were talking about adding on to the Justice Center at the courthouse. And, there wasn't a referendum. Why wasn't there a referendum on that? There is now, but the impact, how do the two impacts compare?
Yeah. So to do a construction project, the county is not required to do a referendum, different than a school district.
Right.
The state, when they create these rules, they don't always create them equally.
Right.
So that was a decision that the county board made to go ahead with that construction project. So that added about $5 million per year of debt service for 20 years. And so there's an end date for that. What we're asking for now through the referendum is an increase of the $3.5 million, which will continue on forever to fund the public safety positions that we have. Now the difference is that in 2005, when levy limits were put into place, the legislature created this option. So if municipalities get into the situation where we're at, where we need to catch up, this is the vehicle for us to do that. And so since that's been put in place for 2005, St. Croix County has never gone to referendum for an increase in the levy.
Okay. So this would be the first time in 18 years, basically,
Correct.
since that was put. All right. Well, we talk about what ifs. We talked about what if it passes and how soon positions can start being created and so forth. What if this doesn't pass? what has been the discussion about what Plan B might be?
Well, Plan B is the levy limits that we have in place provide us with so much money, and we won't know that until August, how much that is every year. Public safety will be our priority, but it'll be a couple of positions, not 24 positions. It's a Band-Aid approach to something that needs a much bigger fix.
Well, and when you think about fixes and the impact on the justice, what about help from the state? Because they've got $5 million surplus, or billion surplus rather. So can't they just fund you, give you a couple new assistant DAs?
Hopefully, we'll see. That's been, I think it was not too long ago, every district attorney in the state signed a request to the legislature to increase pay for assistant DAs because it's difficult to recruit for the position. It's $54,000 starting salary for somebody with $100,000 plus in law school debt. So there was a request from every DA in the state to increase salary and give more positions, and I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that will happen. I think it was in the governor's budget essentially, but we'll still see if that passes through the legislature.
And just update me again, how many assistant DAs are there in St. Croix County?
So we have 6 assistant DAs and then myself, so 7 prosecutors total.
And we have 4 judges and a court commissioner.
Right.
All right, very good.
We currently have been down a prosecutor for a while, unable to fill it, so.
Oh, okay, so there's that delay.
Right.
While we're on the topic, we just have only a couple more minutes, but when it comes to filling positions in law enforcement, with national events and the local, we had the George Floyd stuff and defunding police and some convictions that didn't put law enforcement in a good sight. What has that done to the pool of available officers and hiring in your position?
It's made it much more difficult.
Okay.
It's made it much more competitive amongst all the agencies. And we actually just posted for a patrol position, and we had 22 that applied. 12 showed up for the test, and out of that, 3 of them are certified, which means everybody else has no law enforcement experience. So the pool has shrunk quite a bit.
Okay. And what does a starting certified officer that may not have a lot of experience, how much would they be paid by the county?
Union contract, and they start at, I believe it's $33 an hour.
Okay, so that translates to $70,000 a year?
$70,000 a year.
Okay, so more than the prosecutors. Okay, all right. But when you start adding benefits and so forth, each of these positions, is roughly $100,000, and that's not for well-trained or high-experienced officer.
Correct. And then there's the outfitting, squad car, and the amount of equipment that goes with that.
All right. And this referendum will cover that as well as the pay of these individuals?
Correct.
Okay. So that has been thought through, right?
It did,
Okay,
yes.
very good. All right. Anything more that you want to add to our discussion here today to give folks further background? But I think we've covered the what ifs and the little bit of the history, so hopefully folks know a little bit more.
Yep, I think we've covered it well. Thank you,
All
Jamie.
right, good. And where can people find out about voting information? Because with all our candidates, we always ask them, what precinct or what area do you cover? And this is for the entire county. So,
Yep.
And it's residents, right? It's if you just have a business in this county, you don't have a vote unless you're a registered voter in the county, right?
Yep, you have to be a voter in order to vote on the
Not just a
referendum.
taxpayer.
Correct.
Okay. And where can they get voting
Yep,
information?
so we have a page on our website, sccwi.gov/vote.
All right, very good. Well, guys, thanks for coming on the show,
Thank you
telling
for
us
having
about the
us.
referendum. Good luck with that. Good luck with your position filling and everything.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.